Spider-Man: Far From Home is going to be the 23rd film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it comes at a weird time in the franchise. The MCU is in a bit of a transitioning period, and there's plenty of baggage for this film to sort through. Then there are the deep cuts and references from the comics that are sure to influence the movie. Today, we're going to dig into everything you need to know before you see Spider-Man: Far From Home. Before jumping into Spider-Man: Far From Home, it's important to know the current state of the world of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That's actually a pretty big subject to tackle, but we'll break it down into some more manageable chunks. The first thing you need to know is that the Avengers were able to undo Thanos' snap and restore half of all the life in the universe in Avengers Endgame. However, it was not a retroactive fix. The remaining Marvel heroes were unable to revive the Fallen until 5 years after the snap, and the world continued to move forward in that time. That means that a lot of people that Tom Holland's Peter Parker knows are 5 years older and in completely different places in life. Furthermore, many of those who were spared by the snap are still probably dealing with a sense of survival's guilt, the depression that can come with losing several loved ones. Although from the trailers, it seems like those close to Peter were all snapped and revived like him. This element might pop up in the background of the movie. It's also important to note that Thanos and his Black Order were completely defeated at the end of Avengers Endgame. That means he's no longer the lingering threat that hung over the MCU for much of its second and third phase. Plenty of mid- and post-credit scenes went to establishing Thanos as a colossal villain and hinting at his rise to power. Now that he's gone, those scenes and moments can instead go towards setting up what's next for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It might be a little too soon to set up the MCU's next overarching villain, but we might get a hint of that in Far From Home. Then again, we really don't know anything about the fourth phase of the MCU right now, and it would be smart if Far From Home tried to set up those upcoming adventures. Lastly, it's important to keep in mind that the world of the Marvel Cinematic Universe just lost some of its biggest and most celebrated heroes. Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man sacrificed himself so that he could save the world from Thanos and his army. Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow also gave her life so that the universe could be restored to its full state. Then there's Chris Evans' Captain America, who chose to retire from a life as a hero and passed on his title to Sam Wilson. He also might have broken the rules of time travel in the MCU and also just hung out in the background instead of warning people about every tragedy to happen after the 1940s, but that's a whole nother video. The point is that a universe famous for its heroes has lost some of its most established champions. Not only will the people of Earth be bummed out about their departure, but they'll be looking for people to fill those roles too. It's clear that Far From Home will center on Peter trying to live up to the bar set by Iron Man. But this idea of living up to a legacy may be a major theme of the movie as well. The trailers for Spider-Man: Far From Home are setting up a group called the Elementals as its central antagonists of the film. First appearing in Supernatural Thrillers issue number 8 in 1974, these villains are a bit more obscure than some of the recent Marvel foes. Their origins are also quite a bit more over the top than what we're used to in the MCU. The group consists of Hydron, Master of Water, Hellfire, Controller of the Flames, Magnum, Wielder of the Earth, and Zephyr, the Manipulator of Wind and Sky. They're humans from a different dimension who gained their abilities upon reaching the main Marvel universe. They ruled over the Earth before the rise of Atlantis, but their quest for further power would be their undoing. After obtaining the Ruby Scarab, an artifact that could enhance their abilities, the relic in fact banished them to a different dimension. There are also some storylines where Zephyr, the sole woman of the group, turns against the Elementals and joins the heroes. The group also returns to Earth intermittently and, in one plotline, battles against Carol Danvers. Going by Miss Marvel at the time, the hero is unable to beat them all at once, but comes to defeat them by fighting them each individually. So if they're strong enough to take on Captain Marvel together, the much weaker Spider-Man is in way over his head, right? Probably, but it seems like he'll be getting quite a bit of help. Jake Gyllenhaal's Mysterio, who's supposedly a good guy from a different dimension, is set to help Peter battle these extra-dimensional foes. It also wouldn't be surprising if Brie Larson's Captain Marvel appeared in the film and aided Spider-Man. Her appearance would also continue the unusual dynamic between the two that fans fell in love with in Avengers Endgame. Then again, Spider-Man might get some help from the more monstrous side of the Marvel Universe to take down these powerful villains. Although it's far from the centerpiece of the Marvel collection of characters, the comics have featured a variety of traditional monsters. Unique takes on Dracula, the Wolfman, and the creature from the Black Lagoon exist in the world of Marvel Comics. Furthermore, Mephisto, the literal devil, is a massive player in a number of Marvel storylines and has influenced Parker's life a number of times. Nakantu, or the Living Mummy, has grappled with the elementals in the comics and may do the same in Far From Home. Functionally immortal and indestructible, the Living Mummy is a pretty morally gray character. Mostly he's just interested in ending his immortality and either returning to full life or finally passing away. It's easy to imagine him battling the elementals either as a way for him to finally perish or because he believes their powers may hold the key to restoring his life. It would be great if Far From Home introduced weirder elements of Marvel Comics into the MCU. Extra-dimensional beings and fun spins on classic horror monsters would certainly be a fun addition to the MCU and open up a bunch of new possible storylines. Although there is a good chance that the elementals are merely a ruse conducted by one of Spider-Man's trickiest enemies. Mysterio, the alias of Quentin Beck, is a classic Spider-Man villain, having first appeared in 1964. His whole gimmick is that he pretends to have magic powers, but doesn't actually. Instead, he's just really good at stage magic, hypnosis, practical effects, and stunt work to make it look like his actions are magical. This is actually a pretty good gag, considering most major characters in the Marvel Comics know at least one or two people who have actual magical powers. Jake Gyllenhaal's Mysterio, though, claims to be from a different dimension, so that means we're looking at one of two possibilities in Spider-Man Far From Home. The first and simplest explanation is that Mysterio is lying. He dressed up a salvaged Iron Man suit to seem magical and is faking the elemental's attack to profit off of being a hero. He's either doing this through the advanced alien technology we saw in Spider-Man Homecoming, or is enlisting the help of other Spider-Man villains like Hydro Man and Cyclone. The second possibility is that Mysterio is actually telling the truth. This implies that there's an evil Mysterio running around the movie as well, and that there's an entire dimension where traditional bad guys are good and familiar heroes are the villains. This could be a huge deal and means that someday soon we may see a film where the remaining MCU heroes fight their evil doppelgangers. Or, at the very least, implies that the MCU will introduce the X-Men and the Fantastic Four through some kind of dimensional blending storyline. Getting back to the Fantastic Fishbowl-headed figure, it's important to keep in mind just how often he clashes with Spider-Man. He's a regular part of the Sinister Six's rotating members and frequently ends up fighting Spider-Man during his schemes to make a quick buck. Unlike a lot of villains in the comics, he isn't really interested in taking over the world or obtaining power and is more focused on becoming rich instead. It's also worth noting that most versions of Mysterio are depicted as being pretty sad dudes. While he's boisterous and cocky during battle, he's pretty lonely in his personal life. He's shown talking to his stage animals because he doesn't really have friends, and he even builds a robot daughter for himself so he can feel like he has a family. This, of course, is deeply sad and profoundly creepy. Mysterio has earned actual superpowers from time to time in the comics. Most famously, he gained infernal powers after traveling to Hell and becoming an agent of the Lords of the Underworld, although he would quickly lose these abilities in a soft reboot to the franchise. He's also far more inclined to psychologically torture Spider-Man and deceive the hero rather than facing him in a direct fight. It's still not totally clear what's going on with Jake Gyllenhaal's Mysterio from the trailers, but knowing the character, we should at least be suspicious of him. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes drama and business matters happening right now that will likely affect Far From Home and the broader MCU. Starting things off is the deal between Sony and Disney that let Spider-Man be in the MCU in the first place. Sony bought the multimedia rights to Spider-Man from Marvel in the 90s when the company was facing bankruptcy and needed some quick cash. When Disney bought Marvel in 2009, they could not get the movie rights to the character that the comics company had already sold. So Disney had to strike a deal with Sony to get Spider-Man in the MCU. While Sony gets all of the box office revenue from MCU Spider-Man films, Disney gets creative control of the character and all the funds of the sales of Spider-Man merchandise. So if a bunch of new Spider-Man heroes and villains appear in this movie, it's probably because Disney wants some new toys to sell. This also means that there's a good chance that Tom Hardy's Venom will show up in the movie. Not only could Disney make some money selling some sweet Venom action figures, but it'd also create more hype for the upcoming Venom sequel film. It's also important to remember that this is the first time in a long while where we really don't have a clear picture of where the MCU is headed from here. Disney has been pretty secretive about their plan for the fourth phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Moreover, Avengers Endgame felt like such a solid ending to the past 11 years of the MCU that continuing the franchise seems more difficult than ever. Far From Home is in a weird place where it feels like an epilogue to Endgame but also needs to set up the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That's a really tall order and may result in parts of Far From Home feeling a bit disjointed. It's also good to keep in mind that a lot of the Marvel actors are in unusual places with their contracts right now. Chris Evans and Captain America have both left the MCU, so it's very unlikely that we'll see either Captain America or Iron Man in this movie. Similarly, both Gwyneth Paltrow and Don Cheadle are reportedly finished with the MCU, which means that Pepper Potts and the Iron Patriot will not appear, even if their characters would help Peter cope with the loss of Tony Stark. A good number of the MCU cast members are also locked into TV deals with Disney and will appear in the MCU programs on the Disney Plus streaming service. While that may not necessarily prevent them from appearing in more MCU films, it'd be pretty demanding for the actors to hop between the two different projects. Speaking of contracts, Tom Holland has at least one more film left in his after Spider-Man Far From Home. The actor also let it slip that there's a third MCU Spider-Man film in the works, so we can expect Far From Home to set that film up or at least leave things a bit open for exploration. That pretty much covers everything you need to know before you see Spider-Man Far From Home. If you have any further questions, feel free to ask them in the comments section down below. Also, be sure to like this video, subscribe to The Binger, and click on the bell icon so you can see upcoming videos before anyone else.